Your phone does not look at the world in the same way that you do. Your phone interacts with the world in a completely different way. Okay? And that's what this show is all about. We're going to take you into that world, we're going to show you how it works, and we're going to show you why you should care. Okay? So the first thing to realize is that your phone talks way more than you do. Okay? You think you're heavy on the airtime. Your phone's talking all the time, jabbering away. Your phone is talking right now. It's just that we can't hear them because we don't have the right kind of ears. They are a different species. They talk in a different way to us. But I know a man who does have the right kind of ears, and it's Glen. And since you walked into this venue, he's been listening in to the signals, the noises coming out of your phone, and he can show you what that conversation looks like. Shall we hear from Glen? Yeah. There you go, Glen, take it away.
Hi everyone, I'm Glen. I'm not as terrifying as Geoff makes out, I promise. In the industry, I'm what we call a white hat hacker, so a good kind of hacker, ethical hacker, lots of words like that. And essentially what I have with me here today, standard laptop, nothing special, running a bit of fancy software, but not so fancy that I couldn't teach you to use in 5 or 10 minutes, freely available software. And as Geoff mentioned, I'm able to listen into certain things. Well, to listen, you need ears. So I've got 3 ears currently. So these 2 here, and this one over here. Should pose for the photo. Clearly those aren't ears, those are antennas.
That's the thing my mum would understand, right? That's the level we're working at, just so you know. Local authorities up and down the country have started offering free public Wi-Fi. What they're a bit slightly less forthcoming about is that those taxpayer-funded Wi-Fi boxes are gathering exactly this kind of information. The MAC address, the unique fingerprint of every phone with its Wi-Fi on that passes by that box is gathered, whether you connect to the Wi-Fi or not. So whether you take up Hounslow Council on its offer of free Wi-Fi, your phone is still tracked if its Wi-Fi is on. And tracked, by the way, in most cases, by a private company, contracted by the council to provide the service. And that private company, depending on the terms of the contract, can then sell that data on to third parties. Now, there are groovy reasons to do this, right? If you're, let's say, York City Council, and you've hired a company called Purple Wi-Fi to provide your free public internet access, let's imagine you look at a particular street, and you pull in all the data about who's passed by there, and you realise that street's really busy at lunchtime, and you think, oh, well, we should put some benches in there and a coffee shop and make the place nice. For town planners, it's a gift, it's great, it's absolutely fantastic, and that's a good example. Let's look at another example. Let's say a few months from now there is a demonstration or a protest outside York City Council's headquarters, perhaps against austerity cuts under an incoming Conservative government. Right? If you're a York City Council, you can use that data to watch people as they move towards that protest and potentially seal off the streets to divert them away. Or let them go and just build up a database over time of people who've been to protests. A troublemakers phone list, if you like. Except you haven't got a troublemakers phone list, have you? You've got a list of people whose phones happened to be there when trouble later happened. But hey, correlation, causality, who gives a fuck? Right? You've got to, CCTV isn't actually that useful for surveillance. Because those CCTV files, those video files, take up a lot of space on a computer. And then when the police get them all in, it's difficult because they're all in different formats. CCTV is all in different formats, they have to get in the same format. And then analysing that stuff is a bitch. To the point where, after the English City riots a couple of years ago, it was actually easier to get eagle-eyed police staff to look at all those videos to try and spot the suspects, rather than getting a piece of computer software to do it. Okay, CCTV is not great at surveillance. This stuff, this is brilliant for surveillance. These are small, like character sets, text strings, very, very small files. You can pull them all in, very easy to correlate, very easy to analyse. You can analyse them almost in real time. This is the cutting edge of surveillance compared to CCTV. And as I say, it's being put in place by local councils. So, for example, anyone been to Stables Market in Camden? Yeah, a couple of people. Was your phone's Wi-Fi on? Yeah, your phone got tracked. Purple Wi-Fi do Stables Market. As I say, whether you connect to the Wi-Fi or not, everything, as I said at the beginning, that's happening on this stage is happening in the real world to your phones. Anyone know about this? Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for having us. And I think there's going to be a Q&A afterwards. For the moment, that was the secret life of your mobile phones. Thanks so much.
Okay, so guys, I just wanted to ask briefly, what inspired you guys to put on the show like this?
To be honest, I've been working on this stuff, as I said, for Channel 4 News for a few years. It just pissed me off. It just pissed me off, this idea of, oh, well, you'll never find out, you'll never know. And so I was trying to work out how to make that work for telly. And so we came up with a project called Data Baby. Basically, we created a virtual identity, an online identity. And we used it, we basically petri dished this person who was as real as possible online. And we tried to basically use that to track where the information went. And we went to Latitude Festival and we did a talk about the project. And I was thinking, well, how do you get like a live audience? How do you actually talk about data? It's just all up there ethereal. So I basically at Latitude sort of hacked, Wiresharked my own phone and put it up on screen and said, look, this is my phone, this is what it's doing. And people found it interesting and they said, oh, could you do that for mine? And I sort of thought, yeah, we probably could. So we sort of started working on the show from there. But that was what inspired it, this idea of you'll never understand it, it's too complicated. And I looked at Wireshark and thought, no, it's not the case.
And I also wanted to ask, was there anything that you can't convey within the space of a player, or something you found really difficult?
Getting the laptops to switch and not reformat the display was quite difficult. But that's just a problem this evening.
I mean,
anything that's difficult?
Yeah, so the things that we're showing you here today are above the board, essentially. So the reason that the dustbins can do it and supermarkets do it is because it's illegal, it's okay. If we wanted to be a bit more mischievous, there's lots of things on the darker side that we could do. The scale of white hat and black hat hackers, maybe gray in the middle. Now, one thing I didn't mention during the talk, when your phone's looking for all these previous Wi-Fi networks, I can spoof those networks and convince you to connect and then intercept your traffic at a very kind of private level. And doing that, then we can start pulling out usernames and passwords and more sensitive stuff, which, yeah, it might be okay because you're kind of a consenting audience, but it's a kind of a grayish area. So the stuff we're doing here is kind of above the board. Those types of techniques, all the software we use here, we developed that at the company I work for, SensePost, and we use these tools in engagements for clients to kind of demonstrate risk, which essentially means we're hackers for hire. They pay us to break in, and these are the techniques that we use. And the scary thing, as I mentioned earlier, this stuff dates all the way back to 2004. So literally this attack is called a Karma attack from 2004, which is, I've been giving similar talks about 3 years now, and I keep saying it's been 9 years, 10 years, now it's 11 years. With iOS 8 point latest, it's a little bit better. The phones are a little bit more quiet, but it's still fairly noisy, and Android devices are horrifically noisy.
We sort of, some people sort of say, well, why don't you could do a phone hacking show and you could, stun the audience by throwing up their pictures, which would be fun, but I don't know whether that's happening in the real world. I mean, I'm told it is. I'm told there are nasty hackers out there who are intercepting Wi-Fi hotspots and stuff. But honestly, I don't see a massive amount of evidence of that. I don't see in the sort of hacker forums, I don't see people saying, oh, I went to Starbucks and look what I got. But they're kind of operating at a more sophisticated level. So I don't want to kind of do a show that freaks people out about a thing that I don't know whether is actually happening or not. So the stuff Glenn was talking about just then, we don't know whether it's happening. The advertising stuff, the cookieing stuff, the data going everywhere, the council's tracking your movements, that stuff's happening. So we try to concentrate the show on what's really happening in the real world so that we're not vanishing off into a possible future. We're staying really cemented in what's actually happening. Maybe more exciting to do a hacking show. I don't know, maybe we should do that. Anyway.
Yeah, on a final note, before I give it over to the audience, you mentioned that the software you use is free. I assume that's open source. Could you talk a little bit about where you use open source tools?
So the operating system you saw, the actual OS itself, is called Kali Linux. So it's a variant of Debian. It's a free operating system. You can download it, and it's essentially kind of the OS for hackers. It's just packed with thousands of hacker tools ready to go out the box. And the way that the hacker community works, essentially, I mean, even dating back to, hacking used to mean something different. Now it means kind of breaking into things. In the 60s and 70s, hacking meant, a really enthusiastic computer programmer who liked to tweak and mess with things. And essentially that ethos that started back then was this idea of, creating free software, open source software, contributing to the community. And whilst the actual meaning of the word hacker might have changed a bit, that community is still here and is still very strong in the sense that the tools that we make, we release them into the wild for everyone to play with and to contribute towards. So the Snoopy software that I wrote, that's you can download that on GitHub. So GitHub's just a place to share source code, and it's got I think at least 20 people all around the world contributing to it. And for me that's quite exciting. I put this thing together, and there's people are using it. I'm so excited. Two, people are so excited about it that they're making modifications and enhancing it and helping me fix bugs. And that's kind of how the community works. We're toolsmiths, and we put these tools together and release them out in the wild. And what effect that has is quite interesting. There's a tiny ecosystem of security. And hackers are actually really useful because these tools we make, and even the bad hackers who go and take those tools and do bad things with them, they force the defenders, the manufacturers or companies, to put up better defenses. And put up better defenses, and the hackers have to find harder ways to break in. And through that ongoing process of back and forth, essentially we arrive at today where we have things like SSL that allow you to do private internet banking and not have your cred stolen. All of the security stuff that we have today is because hackers broke the previous iteration and the defenders had to make it better.
Okay, so now off to the audience. Does anybody have a question for these guys? Yeah, back.
Hello. Yeah, there's a lot of data around, and we live in a data economy, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because data that pay for things like developing apps, and we can have the apps for free. So there's also a very good side to it. So how do you balance the negatives and the positives in this economy?
Yeah, Glenn and I have slightly different views on this one. For me, what worries me is the lack of transparency about it, the opacity in this. So, yeah, I get the app for free, but the app doesn't seem particularly willing to tell me which companies beyond the app get a share of the data, how it's used. It's quite difficult once you drop that data into the app's pool to kind of track the eddies as it goes off. So I understand the exchange, it's just the exchange is being done on terms that to me don't seem entirely transparent. And let's face it, if you look at the terms and conditions, I know you looked at Periscope, the new live streaming app that Twitter's bought. Periscope has the same kind of terms and conditions most apps have. We have your data, we have everything you broadcast in perpetuity for whatever purposes we like, and just share with whoever we want. It's not great. So yeah, I get it for free, but it's kind of free with one hand behind the back. Do you see what I mean? So that's how I feel about it. But as I say, I think Glenn's got a different approach, I think.
Yeah, so I'm not fond of where we are at the moment, I guess. There's a fantastic cartoon with two pigs in a barn. You've probably seen it, I think it was on in some newspaper, essentially two pigs in a barn. They're saying, wow, this is great, we got all this hay, it's so comfortable, we get fed every day, it's wonderful, and it's all for free. Well, yeah, they're going to get turned into pork chops. It's not for free, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And if you're getting something for free, it's probably a case that you're not the client, you're the product. And that's the caption on the cartoon. And essentially, I'm similar with Geoff, I'm a bit suspicious of stuff that's free. So the app is free, but no, it's not free. Nothing's free. You're giving your personal information away in exchange for the app. And varying apps will have varying degrees of how much data they collect, what advertisements they send at you. I'm quite keen for a different business model, just to get away from advertising and tracking altogether. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm sure there's a different revenue model. Essentially, the entire internet is built on advertising. Google, billions of dollars in revenue just because of advertising. They have self-driving cars and spaceships. None of that makes any money. All the money comes from advertising. And that's a bit scary. And I'd really love to see a different business model where we can just detach from that, at least opt out. So at the moment, or opt in rather. At the moment it's all opt out, and it's quite hard to opt out. And even when your data is anonymized, with Google, they anonymize your data, but researchers have shown time and time again, it's trivial to take the anonymized ID of yours and turn it back into, the individual themselves.
Okay, another question in the back.
Hiya. So, without saying that you recommend, but are you saying that you turn off Wi-Fi when you walk out of the building every day, and you only ever connect over SSL?
I would like to say that, do as I say, not as I do. Yes, you should do that. I forget all the time. I mean, I mentioned earlier how I was being followed by my tablet in my laptop bag. And the problem is the current state of things. The onus is on the individual, the user, to be secure. Right, okay, I have to follow this checklist of things. Okay, turn off Wi-Fi. Okay, make sure the web address has HTTPS in it. Okay, this one doesn't. Check the domain. Is it, downloads.microsoft.com or microsoft.downloads.com? One of them's bad. The IT guy said one of them is bad. And I think there's just far too much onus on the average person on the street to remember this checklist of things. And what I'm hoping to see, or I'm working on, is a future where all of that onus is gone. For developers, for users, security, being secure and being anonymous is built into the technology that we use. And if you're an app developer and you want to build an app on your phone, as you open your app creation software, by default, the underlying layers should guarantee security and the ability to be anonymous. So at the moment, the onus is on developers. Okay, I have to write secure code, that's quite tricky. And the user, okay, I have to remember all these list of 10 magic things that Glenn said in order to try and be secure on the internet. And I forget all the time. So I try to turn my Wi-Fi off, but I forget all the time. I try to, a really good option is to use a VPN. To use a VPN on your phone and your laptop. Essentially that encrypts your traffic and leaves this venue and goes to maybe a different country and exits there. And it's got this nice pipe all the way that's solid and encrypted. And that's nice and that's ideal, and there's all sorts of other tricks I can show you, but it always boils down to convenience versus security. And it's much more convenient. Hey, I'm at Starbucks. I really want to see if John replied to my Facebook message. Well, I'll just quickly join the Facebook wireless network. What could go wrong? And most of the times nothing will go wrong, but I still feel it should be the case that we're protected in all instances.
I'd say I've started. It's weird. I feel since doing the show, I've taken a lot of these measures more seriously. Started using VPN, just use Tor by default, which I didn't used to do. I find it fun. I like it. I get a little power trip out of know my IP address. I don't know. I feel like that. I just wonder what percentage of the population will get that, will want to do that. But I wonder if you could somehow convey that, and somehow people could feel empowered by this and excited by this and sort of proud of themselves, and whether that would filter out. What percentage of the population would get that, would feel that? I don't know, probably quite small, but you never know.
Okay, another question in the back.
Oh, hi, sorry. Well, exactly as you just said, I think it's a balance of convenience against risk, and if you sort of look at a society that largely protects our properties with a Yale lock, something that's been around for sort of 50 years or, arguably to the Egyptians. How dangerous is this? How far do we could all put 10 locks on our front doors, but equally I'm very aware of the benefits of being able to not have to remember, say, all the passwords of every website that I go into, to be able to sort of track flights of family to, there's lots of benefits to the technology as well. So it's, to what degree should I switch off from that and lose those benefits in favour of protecting myself from an unknown risk?
So I think you can definitely balance it. I mean, I'm kind of looking to the future where everything's rainbows and puppy dogs. At the moment, there are some simple things that you can do that will give you a lot of benefit, and it depends on your risk appetite. If you really don't care if your bank account's emptied or if your details are sold all over the world, then connect to every network, install every app, install every browser toolbar, like grandma does.
Maybe your grandma.
It's always hilarious. You have to fix someone's computer, usually an elderly relative, and you open up Firefox or Chrome, or usually IE, I guess, and 80% of the real estate is toolbars. And so if you want to be, if you just don't care, a lot of people don't care, then you assume that risk. But I think there's a few small things you can do that will quickly ramp up your security. And the way most hackers and attackers and whatever work, they go for the easy targets. If you do a few simple things, you're likely for them to just have a glance, it looks a bit too hard. There's 1,000 other sheep who are much easier to attack, and go after them. So just simple things. So keep your software up to date. So update your iOS, your Android, your laptop software. It's a little bit annoying, but the benefit's really great. Keep your software up to date. That's probably the best one. Use a VPN, maybe. So if you don't want to use a VPN, just be aware, if you're connecting to Starbucks or an airport Wi-Fi, maybe Facebook's okay. If it gets hacked, maybe not so serious. But if you're logging into your bank account, kind of assume that might get compromised. Unlikely, but it does happen. And because I work in the space, I see a lot more. Because our clients come to us, hey, my bank account's been emptied. Most weeks that happens, but I guess our ears are closer to the ground. But a few small things will give you a lot of benefit, I guess. And if you are a bit more paranoid, then there's 50 other things that we can do to make sure you're absolutely anonymous.
I think just quickly in terms of risk, for me risk is always about threat. And I think in here you've got three bands of threat, if you like. The band Glen's talking about is the criminal threat band. That's obviously malicious. You need to do things about that. Below that, you've got this sort of advertising, marketing threat of your data being pulled and sold on and so on. You've got to manage that, because if we're in this position where we've got to give some data to get some stuff, that needs a bit of managing. What's worrying for me is there's obviously now a super layer above both of those, which is government level surveillance, and that's far more difficult to do anything about. So try as you might to do the advertising and take care of that, try as you might to take care of the malicious, hacker stuff. At a top level, you've also got government level surveillance, and that's where it starts to all fall down. I mean, I dealt with the two threats in work. I was trying to manage them, and then the Snowden stuff came along, and I just thought, well, what can I do? That was the tricky one.
Okay, another question over there.
Yeah, hi. So I have a couple of questions. The first is about cookies. Would it be possible to minimize their effects on our private use of whatever it is, right? Because every website forces us to accept them, right? I guess ideally you should navigate and then get rid of all your chronology, but then again, it's useful to have it. So that's one question. The other one is about connecting apps among each other. So how dangerous it is in terms of the amount of data that we give if we connect Facebook with Twitter, with Instagram, with and blah, blah, blah. And the third one is if I got a credit card cloned, right? So just get a text and say, hey, someone purchased a £100 phone on your behalf, and that wasn't me, right? Is it possible that it was because I navigated any website and they hacked my data from there? Okay, thanks.
It's a cheeky triumvirate of questions. Cookie, do you want to do cookies?
Yeah, so the first question, if I understand, was cookies, what can I do about it? So I guess I can tell you my approach, which might be a good starting point. So in your browser, it's a good idea to have, well, it's a possible idea to have some browser plugins that, one, let you know exactly what's going on, because it's a lot of effort to open up Wireshark and plow through lots of traffic. So you can get plugins for Firefox and Chrome and some mobile apps as well that will either block cookies or get your permission saying, hey, this website wants to set this cookie, yes or no kind of thing. So for most websites, like if I'm just browsing news or searching for something arbitrary, I just block all cookies, like no cookies, thank you. Another approach I used for advertisers, there's lots of advertising blocking plugins. It's like AdBlock Plus that will kind of disable adverts and stop their ability to track you. That works well for websites you're not logged into. Once you want to log into a website, like Facebook or something, it's a little bit harder. You can try and selectively say, okay, only allow these cookies, don't allow these cookies. For example, it's quite easy to identify Google tracking cookies. They all start with a name, _. So essentially, a cookie has lots of purposes. One is to track you and send adverts towards you. The original purpose of a cookie is to kind of authenticate you. So once you log into Facebook, Facebook gives you a cookie, so your browser knows and the server knows that you're logged in. Okay, this is Glen, this is Glen's cookie, so you don't have to type in your password multiple times. So cookie is also a useful thing. You'll find if you block all cookies, you won't be able to log into any websites. So block cookies, either completely for websites you don't log into, selectively for sites you do log into, and maybe run some kind of advertising blocking service. There's another interesting plugin called...
That's not right, though.
That's not right. Being able to actually stop a company from making money out of you for delivering a free service is as not right as stealing. Yeah, you might as well go into a news agency and a newspaper rather than give money.
Yeah, stealing a newspaper is illegal and you'll go to jail. If an advert is being placed on my computer without my permission.
That's just because government regulation hasn't caught up.
Now it's a proper Cybersalon.
I think part of the issue, because we investigated that a few months ago, and I think part of rejection of the cookies, it's a little bit psychological, because people have a good sense that Google is making way too much money. A number of companies are making way too much money because they're running premiums on the product that are quite hard to explain unless there was a very large imbalance. And I think it's lack of transparency. You know, if Google and the companies that run targeted ads were a little bit more transparent on where is the business model and how they benefit to the degree that they have spare billions flying around, I think people would feel much better. But the sense at the moment is that there is 5 companies with a practically monopoly on the data and raking up unbelievable amount of money, and it's a closed system. So, well, we are trying to do something about helping the alternatives, but every time somebody tries to set up alternative search engine or alternative innovation, Google just sits on them at pile of bricks and buys them, which is great for the guys who are doing it, but we have very little alternative at the moment.
And they're not doing it for the right reasons, because if they can just be bought, they're exactly the same.
Well, I think the debate which we're trying to stimulate is about exactly that. Where is the balance? And a lot of people during the research came with the view, we don't know what's happening on the other side. It's asymmetric. So I guess part of the answer would be dialogue with the companies, which I think the Lib Dem manifesto is trying to touch on. Can we have a bit more dialogue? Because we have cross-cultural problem, which we discussed before. The Samsung operates with the Asian structure of lack of data protection because Asia has no data protection for personal use. Apple operates with very weak data protection because it's only very, very weak consumer right created by Kennedy, and it's pretty meaningless. And they're landing in Europe, where we have quite high cultural expectations because we had Germany, we had Nazis, we had Stasis, we had communism. So we have quite a lot of legislation in place, but we can't force American and culturally different Asian companies who are manufacturing the handsets to follow it. So I think either we do it per country and have the dialogue country by country. So if they want to write roughshods of a Singaporean, so be it, because they have no other expectations. But if they want to do the same in Europe, they have to have a dialogue. And at the moment, it's just one-way lobbying. And we need two-way lobbying. But I think coming back to the questions.
Because the global industry is trying to... I mean, the way the different regimes, I'm Javier Ruiz from the Open Rights Group, and the way that what is happening is that US companies, not just US companies, are lobbying in Europe right now as we speak to lower the levels of data protection to make the what they call global data flows compatible. So there is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a free trade agreement connecting the... No, exactly. What is happening is that they are trying to bring Europe to the same level of data protection as Singapore or Korea. Actually, Singapore, I think, is got a better. Singapore's got a slightly better level of data protection, and with the idea that data has to flow. And I think, I mean, literally this week, NGOs sent a letter to Juncker, the President of the European Commission, precisely on this topic, because there is like European data protection that you are talking about is completely under threat right now. You know, so. It's a lot worse, basically.
So sorry, guys. Can I ask for a response?
I've got a question for Glenn. So if you see the ads, if you were given a thing that said, "Okay, see the ads or pay," would you pay?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not against the company getting revenue. I'm against them tracking me and putting adverts on my face that I don't want to see. So I use Spotify. I'm happy to pay £10 a month. I don't pirate movies. I happily pay Netflix and don't get any advertisements. YouTube's rolling out a new option now where you can pay an annual fee and you get no advertisements. So it's the revenue model. I'm happy for a company to make money. I don't want to be advertised at, I guess. And using things like ad blocker and those kinds of things, that's a message. If enough of us do that, we kind of stand up and say, I don't like this model, please do something else. I want to pay you, but I don't want to.
That's a completely different argument. You're saying you don't want to be advertised at, which is completely different to I don't want to be tracked.
Often they go hand in hand. The purpose of tracking is largely to advertise at you.
How many services do no ad targeting at all? I don't know many services who don't do any targeting or breakdown of adverts at all, who just literally put an ad in front and just don't use any data to kind of target the ad.
Sorry guys, just to kind of give some other people space to ask a question. That lady over there.
Yeah, I'm a member of Breaking the Frame, which is a politics of technology group. So I just say in brackets, I'm deeply embarrassed about the fact that I have a smartphone, and I got it for practical reasons. But what I wanted to address specifically was this question about the different levels of legality of data protection in different areas. And in this country, there is a thing called the Domestic Extremist Database, which I have every reason to believe that I'm on, even though only more than 3/4 of the people on that database have never actually been arrested for anything. We supposedly have these very tight laws. So I don't think that the fact that they've passed laws is actually much to the point. When I completely agree with what you've been saying on the platform about tracking and advertising and all that sort of thing. But I did actually have a practical question, which is that because of my slight concerns about being tracked, I turned off not only the Wi-Fi on my mobile phone, but also I don't have the location tracker on my phone. But I was wondering from some of the things that you've been saying whether actually it doesn't really make much difference because your phone is sending out a load of stuff all the time anyway, because I basically just want to use my phone for the other facilities that are on it, like voice recognition and so on.
Am I the only one who missed what was the question at the end of that? Sorry. Your question was... I was
asking about, whether even if you've got all these things turned off, like the location tracker,
can you ever not?
That it's going to kind of soak up your information anyway.
Still be tracked by GSM. The mobile carriers.
Yeah, mobile carriers will. Although I wondered, I turn off mobile data as well. So basically, the phone will get texts and calls. But data from apps is also stopped by that. So if you turn off Wi-Fi and mobile data, you're presumably onto a reasonably good bet?
You are. If you're really paranoid, you can buy a Faraday bag and put your phone in, and then no RF goes in or out. And it's varying degrees. So at the top of the spectrum, you leave everything on, you don't touch anything. The other end of the spectrum, Faraday bag. I guess you want to pick somewhere in the middle that's convenient for you. And turning off Wi-Fi, good start. Turning off data, that will maybe give you some protection, but as soon as you turn it back on, all the apps will probably just throw up all the data that they're collecting in the background anyway.
And if you have that kind of behaviour, you're immediately stand out as suspicious to the government anyway.
Yeah, you have to do that.
Okay, question
properly.
on the far left.
So I'd like to drill into a couple of really interesting points in a fascinating talk. The first is, how is it that somebody might be able to intercept my bank account details? If I am in a Starbucks and I do connect to this open BT Wi-Fi Starbucks thing, but if I'm using a normal web browser with HTTPS, is that going to protect people seeing the contents of my emails or the contents of my interaction with the bank, including any password details? And then second, I'd like to come to the very interesting question you raised at the very end, which is why is it that there's all this stuff happening? Why is the phone sending messages to places we've never heard of. And you said that's what you'd really like to understand, and I'd like to understand it as well. My hypothesis is that a lot of it may be more cock-up rather than conspiracy. It may just be that there's a whole bunch of things happening because it's a complex system that people haven't really thought through, and it's just sort of happening in background. I mean, how likely is that? Or how likely is it instead that all these companies really are trying to get their hands on this data deliberately rather than it sort of being left in and nobody's understood it, nobody's drilled down to it? I'm not sure how likely that is, but I wonder if you thought about it.
I'll address the second. Do you want to do that? I'll address the second one, and I'll let him at the first one. You're right. It might be more cock-up than conspiracy. I've started to think recently, and this isn't fully fleshed out. I'm like thinking off the top of my head a bit, but talking to angel investors and venture capitalists and so on, people linked into that community. When you build your startup and you create your app and you create your company, people who want to give you money will ask a couple of two key questions. Number one, what's your growth rate? How big are you growing? And number two, what data have you got? And if at that stage you turn around and say, well, we only get the email address, don't bother with anything else, the VCs, I suspect, and the angel investors will say, you'll be worth a lot more money the more data you have. Because people in that industry, as I say, are seeing data as cash. They don't see a difference between those. So I don't really buy the sort of, I buy somewhere midway between cock-up and conspiracy, which is you may as well get it because you can, and fundamentally when you sell, as most of them want to, you'll be worth a bit more. I wonder whether that's what's driving it. I've started to think recently that might be what's driving it.
So in terms of hacking your bank account, there are varying degrees of difficulty, and it's a good example of the back and forth between attackers and defenders. So at the moment, if you go into Starbucks, you join their Wi-Fi network, the immediate implication is that everybody can see everyone else's traffic. Just the way Wi-Fi works, it just shouts it all out. Your laptop actually receives everyone's traffic, it just chooses not to show you stuff that's not for you. But with one of these antennas and a free bit of software, you can see everybody's traffic. Now, if you're using something like, I think, Instagram, they don't encrypt all of their stuff, so you can see cookies, probably not passwords, but you'll see cookies just flying over the air in front of you without any kind of interaction. Yahoo Mail had this up until about a year ago. They proudly announced they're rolling out SSL 14 years too late, which was hilarious. Don't use Yahoo Mail. So if the website or app doesn't use any encryption, that stuff just flies over the air. You can just passively slurp it up and no one will know you're there. If it's a decent app or a decent, like a banking website where it's an HTTPS, the S means it's encrypted. But there are ways to defeat that. The most popular one is a technique called SSL stripping. And basically, I convince your laptop or your phone to connect to my laptop. I do what we call a man-in-the-middle attack, and I pass that connection on, kind of proxy it onto the real server, but I initiate a non-encrypted connection with you. So you'll communicate with me over HTTP, not encrypted, and then I give that message onto the server encrypted, so the server doesn't know that anything's up. There are ways for defenders to defeat that, and most good banking websites and eBay's rolled it out, Amazon's rolled it out, a thing called HSTS, is that the one? Lots of acronyms. I can't remember what it stands for. Essentially, it's a directive from the server. So the first time you connect to a bank, your banking website, your bank will say, okay, Mr. Browser, anytime you ever connect to me, make sure it's encrypted. And that will defeat the little SSL strip thing going on here. So we took a seat back and we thought, and actually last year at DEF CON in Vegas, we unveiled a new tool called Mana. And what Mana does, it kind of essentially tricks your device. So instead of going to www.bank.com, I redirect you to www.bank.com, just 4 W's, put an extra one in there. And because it's the first time you're connecting to that, I can defeat that special HSTS thing. So unless you're paying really close attention and you notice there's an extra W in there, we'll get your traffic. And it's a back and forth like that, and as that's defeated, we'll think of a new way to do it.
Glenn is an ethical hacker.
Yeah, so we release these tools for free to educate and to kind of put pressure on the defenders. Hey, look, we're breaking you really badly here. You need to fix this because if you watch the Russian underground, people are using this stuff to do bad things. And yeah, it's a back and forth. And the overarching message there is just be careful on networks you don't trust. Your home network, do your internet banking. If you're on Starbucks, it's unlikely, but there could be a guy with a black hat sitting there who could do something mischievous.
Okay, we're going to have time for 3 more questions. Please keep it to 1 question a person.
I was just going to say I have 2 quick questions, if that's okay. Is that okay?
So, we'll do one-word answers.
Very quickly. So you mentioned the kind of government collecting data that worries you. Since private companies have the data already, and government sometimes can do useful things with data, like Yorkshire planning, city, tube or whatever, where would you draw the line to permitting or even forcing government access to private data? Where, why would you trust Google more than you trust your government? Where should the line be? And of accessing data. And the second one, what kind of policy mechanisms would we need to have a sensible, nuanced way of regulating data? So I want my location service to be accessible to Citymapper, but not to everyone, and that policymaker needs to understand that to give me a GDPR data protection that works and doesn't limit sort of business and my benefit. So what kind of policy mechanisms do you think would be suitable if that's a big question, I suppose, but what would you envision?
Yeah, the answer is yes. Yes to both of them. So the first one was about what level of access should governments be given to private data. I mean, there's one example of this that really stands out to me. This local council's Wi-Fi tracking stuff. I thought, well, I wonder how much these companies are getting. So I put a subject access request into BT, the cloud, Purple Wi-Fi, and gave them my MAC address and said, can I get all the data you have on this MAC address? And they all wrote back and said, that's not a personally identifiable bit of information. Your MAC address is not personal information. And I was stymied. And it turns out the Information Commissioner's Office, the privacy watchdog in the UK, agrees. MAC address, not personal info. So you're sort of stymied. So I think no matter what you enact about government access to private data, there's always a sort of lag of the legislation and the regulations actually working out what's going on. The idea of a MAC address hasn't been legislated for, and as I say, the ICO don't seem up to speed in this, and how significant that is and what it can be used for as a tracking and surveillance tool. As far as they're concerned, it's just phones you need.
There's the ICO, the sort of reputation in Europe as being one of the most subservient information commissioners. If you ask in Germany, you will get a different answer.
Possibly, yeah. Couldn't possibly comment. But no, I just think, as I say, they're weak in the technical skills, and so I think that's what needs to happen to then catch up. The second question I've completely forgotten already. Well, it was
who's in the place to make right policies?
I don't know. Not the Intelligence and Security Committee, not the surveillance commissioners. I mean, it's really hard not to look at those people and feel like they're part of the establishment, which I know is a controversial term, but there just seems a lack of will to kind of get different groups involved, real people involved, and that would do so much to reassure the public, I feel, if you get people involved in that debate, and if you could speak to different groups, not in a kind of come into our committee room and speak to us way, but in an actual proper consultative way. I think that would fix the problem. So it's quite a lame answer. But, yeah.
Okay, another question there at the back.
Hi, you note that it's hard to get the public to perk up on this issue. Have you got any horror stories beyond bank robberies that might do it? And is the criminal industry on the rise as well?
Glen's got loads of horror stories.
I have a few horror stories. Gosh, I mean, we see all kinds of things. So, for our day job, we hack stuff, and clients come to us when they've been hacked. I mean, some of the scary stuff that we see. Gosh, I mean, the good horror stories are when for example, the hacker group Anonymous goes after somebody. So there's this kind of loose collective of hackers called Anonymous. There was this researcher from a company called HB Gary that a few years ago wanted to speak at a conference unveiling the identity of some of these characters. And the day the abstract was released, a few hours later, his life was very, very different. So effectively, this group said, okay, so you want to try and unveil us? Well, we're going to hack you back. And they compromised pretty much everything. So they, from his company's website, they got his company's email spool released on the internet. Anyone can go and search it now. It's available online. You can download it. They hacked his iPad, his Apple TV, his wife's account, pretty much every device that he had. Compromised all of those devices.
He used the same password.
Yeah. So it was a combination of things. And the thing is, most of what we do is what we call chained attacks. So a bunch of bad decisions, a bunch of not so bad decisions, like a bunch of mediocre decisions, when chained together, give a really bad environment. So maybe a bit of password reuse here and there. Maybe you forget to turn off your Wi-Fi here and there. Lots of those little things together are usually how we compromise a company or an individual. And yeah, so HB Gary is a nice example of how a company was literally brought to its knees by a bunch of those little bad decisions. We see all kinds of other things. So, personal photographs being released on the internet, bank accounts being emptied. Most banks assume a degree of risk. They assume we will lose X% from cybercrime. Trying to get lower than that is more effort than it's worth. And the numbers, the kind of absolute numbers are huge, really tons of money. We've done assessments where we've taken control of, from banks to governments to mining companies, where we can open and close doors to get into the mine. There's enough horror stories to go around, I guess.
It is really difficult, though, in that those horror stories, you very rarely hear who the culprits are until the police catch up with them. In a rare case of anonymous sort of convictions of the lolsec guys. And B, you very rarely hear the victims. Glenn's not mentioned any company names there, you'll notice. And Glenn's not alone in that. Nobody in the security industry ever mentions any names, at least on the record. So in terms of getting horror stories out, that's really difficult. And the other thing that ties into is the why question. If you don't know why all this is happening, people say, well, why should we be worried about this? And that's sort of the frustration of it that I hope came out at the end of the show, is that I don't really know why. I just know there's this land grab for data happening, and maybe we should keep an eye on how readily we're acquiescing in that land grab for our data. It just feels like something we should, I don't know, information's the new oil, right? You just don't want to give oil away, do you?
Yeah, I think overall we want to just have more control. So this is my device. I want to know what it's doing, who it's talking to, what the risks are. At the moment it's very opaque. It's this pretty device, it's got some icons, Facebook and stuff comes up. But it's hard to understand without coming to a show like this, to actually understand what's going on in the background, who has access to that data, what are the risks of using this kind of network. And it needs to be a bit more transparency, I guess, would be nice.
I think we're about to wrap up. So thank you very much, guys, for coming and for the incredible show. Thank you very much to Digitas for being an amazing host, as always. And just to summarize, digital forces are going up against the normal people. The power is being gathered in more and more monopoly situation with the tech giants. So to pick up on the topic, we have launched the initiative for Digital Citizen Bill of Rights as opposed to Digital Consumer Bill of Rights. And we had a lot of support from House of Commons. A couple of weeks ago, we ran a very big event, absolutely packed to the nines with people sitting on the floor. And hopefully we'll bring it to the Parliament in September, very much from the point of view that we don't really want to be in the situation where Facebook holds everybody's identity. Because I don't know if you know, but 80% of logins with the new apps is done with Facebook. It's a lot, and it's growing, and we are at the stage where we're absolutely handing ourselves to control to one company. I don't know if they are good guys or bad guys, but 80%, it's a lot. Everything else is going down, LinkedIn is going down, Twitter is going down, but Facebook has got the identity and has got it globally. So one of the issues for the Digital Citizen Bill of Rights is to establish who is doing the identity, why we lost control over it. Banks used to hold it, now banks have lost it as well. So it's all happening slowly but very surely, and we haven't really got a dialogue with the companies. We have asked continuously for a dialogue with Facebook, with Twitter, with Google, but you're not getting anything back. So I think if they're not recognizing that there is somebody at the other end, it's just going to be getting more and more conflictual, and I think that's not the point, because we want to enjoy the tech, we love the tech, we're all gadget geeks, we have all 5 in every pocket, but we want it to be a little bit more in a dialogue and a little bit more controlled. So if you want to log on to cybersalon.org, have a look at our Digital Citizen Bill of Rights proposals. They're probably going slightly sharper than the Lib Dem current proposal, but I'm prepared to debate that on the floor. But at least we have to get the conversation, because at the moment it's been kept very much out of the front pages. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Give a big applause to the guys. Thank you to Glen and Greg. And hopefully to see you at Web We Want in May 28 in South Bank. Thank you.
We are Rich Metzen and
Pontus Sandrak.
And we make a video game called Off Grid. We run a small development studio called Semeopus. Yeah, our approach very much with making Off Grid as a game exploring data privacy was that it would be a journey for us as developers to learn a bit more about PGP encryption and security techniques and how to then transform that into something that would make an interesting game mechanic.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a game and it has to be enjoyable and fun, but at the same time we want to make things as realistic as you can and as close to what's actually happening and using real-life tools and without compromising the gameplay side of things at the same time.
The fact that people are now aware of surveillance means that they use digital services with an element of the chilling effect and fear, and they self-censor what they might see, what they might read, who they might align themselves with, and how they might educate themselves. That kind of thing is not good for a democracy or a good society in the long run.
And at the same time, the government surveillance should also be open and transparent to people. Somebody has to watch the watcher in the end. And yeah, they need to be accountable and people need to be told that they're tracked. I think the biggest challenge in the data privacy is actually making people realize that it does affect all of us. Even if you're not a criminal with a certain need for hiding your information, it's going to change your life. It does mean something to you.
Really getting the next generation to see the internet as something that they can contribute to and that they should be aware of their data trail and how they use is something that really needs addressing.